welcome to episode 125 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by MMOs Mathias, Altman-Kurosaki, and Chris Bello. Guys, thanks as always for joining the show. And as we were talking before we started rolling here, hot stove's not so hot, pretty cold. Obviously, we'll talk about Bregman signing that deal with the Cubs, another big offensive player off the board here, or one of off the board. The Mets still looking for positions to fill. But, finally some action. Obviously, it's not Met related, but a team in the National League that obviously the Mets, you assume, would be contending with, goes off the board. So I'll get your thoughts about that and just in general, just this really lackluster offseason. So, Mathias, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris said it before we started, but it kind of was a breath of fresh air that finally one of the top free agents came off the board. I mean, we're looking at it, it's January 12th, pitchers and catchers report in about a month. We're, a few weeks away from the Super Bowl, and so many top guys are still in the market. I mean, basically all the top pitchers other than Tatsuya Imai are on the market, and Dylan Cease. Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, Bo Bichette, those guys are still all on the market. But Bregman finally came off the board. 5 years, $175 million is a lot of money. This is a guy who has been as high as a 162 OPS plus and an MVP runner-up in Houston. He hasn't exactly been that over the last few years, but this is a big signing for the Cubs. It gives them another Gold Glover on the infield too. They have him, Swanson, and Horner all on the same infield. So not a lot of balls are going to get past that infield. And they also have two more Gold Glovers in the outfield with Ian Happ and Pete Kerr-Armstrong. So it's a lot of money to give to a guy who has mainly been a 120 to 130 WRC plus guy over the last few years. But, I mean, someone had to pay him. I didn't see the Mets really as a threat here because they kind of have a glut of infielders, and I don't know where he would have played. But this should set in motion some more signings, I think. But I wonder what it's going to do to the market now. Are these other players going to be asking for similar contracts to what he just got?
Yeah, Mathias, I kind of agree with a lot of what you said right there. Also, as bad as this offseason's been for Mets fans, go look at a Red Sox perspective for a second with Alex Bregman signing.
Yeah.
They trade Devers last year. They commit to Alex Bregman playing third base because Devers couldn't play defensively at the hot corner anymore. And then it's a $10 million difference, the report was, and a no trade clause. And Craig Breslow didn't up it. It's just, oof. I know it's bad in Mets land right now, but it could be way worse. It could be a Red Sox situation. But yeah, in terms of the offseason, there are still some big names out there. We're excited to see what happens with Kyle Tucker and if the Mets are going to win that race. But outside of that, I think the interesting perspective too is, one, all these contracts that are getting handed out, how are they going to be affected by this lockout coming up next offseason? And on top of that, how are the Mets going to attack a Kyle Tucker or a Cody Bellinger when you look at those free agent classes in the next 3 years and kind of how meager they are and how scarce they are? There's not a lot of names out there after this offseason. So there's a lot of implications for the future in the next 5 years for the Mets on how they handle this offseason.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think about Kyle from the Kyle Tucker perspective now. I mean, I feel like a guy, the longer he's out there, you think it would work in the Mets' favor, hopefully for a shorter term, higher AAVL deal. I think that would, probably be best case scenario for the Mets. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be giving him $400 million in like a 10-year contract. But if you can get him for a 3 or 4 year deal with an opt-out in there or whatever, you're paying him $40 million a year. I think that would probably work out best for the Mets. I don't know if just Kyle Tucker is going to be enough after what the Mets have lost this offseason. Now you talk about the Red Sox, and that is a crazy situation, how they shipped Devers out the door and now just lost Bregman. But, I still don't see with what the Mets have lost now between trading Nimmo, even though we've talked about Simeon, losing Alonso. I don't know how you're, even with just a Kyle Tucker, you're going to replace production. Obviously you need someone to hit behind Juan Soto. I keep talking about this. So at some point the Mets are going to have to, I would assume, bite that bullet, whether it's a Bellinger or a Tucker. I personally want nothing really to do with Cody Bellinger. I think he's a good player, but for what he's asking, it's really not worth it at all. I'd rather be given a lot of money for a shorter term deal. Kyle Tucker, that's someone if would be more comfortable hitting behind Soto. If I had a choice between the two. But it's interesting. I do agree that it's a breath of fresh air with Bregman signing. It's a good signing for the Cubs. He's a winner. He's a good player. When he gets to the playoffs, he's also a really good player. I think that has something to do with it as well as that kind of playoff prowess. But just outside of that, it's just been so quiet. Like we talked about, just you pull at straws to talk about topics getting this late into the off season and not much going on. But with that being said, there's a lot of players still available, especially on the pitching side too. And the Mets have a lot of needs to fill. So in theory, there's still plenty of people the Mets can bring to add to the roster. Whether they do that, if it can work out that way, I don't know. But there's still a lot of work to be done here a month before spring training.
I mean, here's the thing is, I'm going to speak to Tucker here, which is that he, in a down year, quote unquote, had 4.5 Fangraphs score and a 136 WRC plus, and was still a 2020 guy at the plate. And he still won a Silver Slugger. He was still an all-star. He offensively outperformed everyone on the Mets except for Juan Soto and Pete Alonso. So, I mean, even in a year where he did not live up to the expectations he set in years past. I mean, he played through an injury for a while, and he still overall had pretty good numbers. And that's why I think I see him getting a deal it's going to have an opt-out regardless. I think if they give him a 4-year deal, probably an opt-out after years 2 and 3. They give him like a 6 or a 7 or an 8-year deal, probably an opt-out after years 3 and 4. And probably an average annual value, you look at it, probably close to 40 million or so. And I mean, going about Cody Bellinger, I think his asks are completely unrealistic right now. He's asking for apparently 7 years and over 30 million annually. He's not an MVP anymore. He's a good player. He's not a great player, I would say. So I think that both these guys, and I'll throw Bo Bichette in there too, reportedly wanting 300 million. A lot of these asks are, I think, a little too much. And all three of these guys would be impact players, but obviously I think Tucker I have circled as the highest impact bat and probably the guy the Mets need the most. And I think he'd be the only guy I'd be comfortable with giving a high AAV contract to.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I agree with that. Like I said, I don't 6, 7, 8 and beyond. I don't know if I really want to do that either. I think I'm capping it at 5, like Bregman's contract. But like you said, there's opt-outs in there. There's absolutely going to be opt-outs in there. I talk about pitching too, as far as what the Mets are concerned. You still have Ranger Suarez out there. You still have Framber Valdez out there. If I had to pick between those two guys, I'd rather Ranger Suarez. Just I think Framber, this kind of clubhouse cancer, moniker that he has is clearly kind of sticking, and I wouldn't want to, invest long term with that if I was the Mets. Suarez, obviously, he had a really good year last year. He has an injury history though, so that's the other thing, given a long term commitment. But they need guys to also throw the ball. So there's still, like I said, players out there that we know you look at the back of the baseball card can on paper help this team. I guess it all just kind of depends on the right price, Stearns' price, and how this continues to play out. The other thing is too, especially on the pitching side, the longer this goes towards spring training or into spring training, how much you're going to get from that player, especially if it's a pitcher, and how good are they going to be? Like we were talking before, this guys like Blake Snell, that signed in the spring didn't have good years. You're getting into that territory now, or close to. So, obviously you have a month to go, but just with the way the offseason has gone in general, it's just been so stagnant. I don't know, how I see it picking up anymore. Hopefully, like you said, though, Bregman signing is like the domino for these bigger pieces now to start fall sooner than later.
Yeah, with the pitching, I always kind of looked at the trade market, at least from that perspective. It just seems like getting a Freddie Peralta always made more sense than taking a chance, as you mentioned, Sal, with Ranger Suarez, who's been injured more often than not. Framber Valdez, who kind of faded off at the end of the year and also had that issue with his tandem catching with, I think that's the biggest story with Framber Valdez. So look for a Freddie Peralta, in my opinion. And then just touching on the Kyle Tucker stuff that Mathias was talking with, Kyle Tucker did play with an injury. And if you go back and you look through June, he had like a 930, 940 OPS. It was up there, and it looked like he was poised for another 30 homer season. So with Kyle Tucker, I always kind of say to myself, when he's healthy, he's a top 10 player in the sport. He really is that upper echelon player. And if the Mets are really looking for an outfielder, that was always the guy to me that made the most sense. Replace Brandon Nimmo with the Kyle Tucker, and then go trade one of Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, and go get that ace. Because if they don't trade for a Freddie Peralta, this team might be content with just going into next season with the plethora of arms they have. Because even though they weren't great last year, they have a lot of starting pitching to choose from. We're talking about all three young kids. We're talking about David Peterson, Sean Manaea. There's arms and there are names there. Tyler McGill even, who just got arbitration. So I don't know if the free agent market is where they're going to attack those needs. But the trade market itself with Freddie Peralta, until he gets traded somewhere or not, I think that's the name we should really all hone in on.
Yeah, because realistically, I don't consider Suarez or Valdez to be an ace. They're both battle tested. I'll give you that much. Ranger Suarez has an excellent postseason track record. He has a 1.4 postseason ERA. That is one of the best in history. Framber Valdez knows what it's like to win a World Series. He was great in the 2022 postseason run for the Astros. But, like you guys were saying, Suarez has been injured the last couple of years. He's never even qualified for the ERA title. Valdez had a really rough second half where his ERA was over 5. I really think Freddie Peralta is the guy that the Mets should be trading for. But I also see that the Cubs had to give up 3 prospects, including their top prospect, Owen Casey, to get Edward Cabrera.
Mm-hmm.
I understand Cabrera is younger. He has more control in terms of years until free agency, but that was a lot to give up. Freddie Peralta is a rental. He is a cheap salary this coming year for a guy his caliber, but he'd also be the ace to lead the staff. So I don't see Tarek Skubal getting dealt at this point. I don't see Joe Ryan getting dealt at this point. I think it's either they trade for Peralta or they sign one of those mid-tier starters and they go into the season with Nolan McLean leading the rotation. Because as weak as the free agent class is next year on the position player side, Tarek Skubal and Freddie Peralta will both be on the free agent market next year. So worst comes to worst, you try to sign them next year. It looks like Skubal, the whole arbitration difference between him and the Tigers, that he's probably not signing an extension before next year. So I think at this point, Freddie Peralta is the one guy I could see them trading for. If not, I have a hard time thinking of another arm they could go out and get. And I do agree, though, that the trade market has significantly more intriguing arms than the free agent market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would stay away from Valdez and Suarez. I guess, like you said, it all depends on price. The Cubs just paid a hefty one, like you were saying. But if the Mets are going to have to go that route, I don't feel comfortable with McLean leading the staff going into the year. I don't think that's fair to him, or really the expectations of the team. I think they need someone who can anchor that staff. You'd love for it to be Sean Manaea. You don't know just what you're getting at that point. David Peterson, can you pitch 25 starts of a full good season? Just not a good, first or second half. Sproat, I imagine, should take a jump this year out of Sproat and Tong. He's someone that obviously looks like or at least last year was more ready to be in the big leagues. Tong wasn't ready yet. I don't think if the Mets were in the position they were in, he would have seen the big leagues at all. They just had no one to pitch. So you have question marks there still, but it's an interesting thing. You bring up Skubal and Peralta being free agents after the season. They can maybe wait a little bit there. With the lockout and everything else, you don't know how that's going to mess up everything. You just want to see the Mets. My thing is I just want to see them compete. If they're not punting, if they're not blowing this thing up, then I'd like to see them compete and not have to continue to wait year after year. But it's interesting. It's a weird spot to be in. I don't really know how to feel expectation wise for this team. I don't, see how they can compete with the Dodgers. At the end of the day, you got to go through the Dodgers. I don't see how that's happening. So I would like I've said before, I'd be blowing the whole thing up. You'd be trading Lindor and everyone else you can, playing the young guys. Soto puts the butts in the seats till he opts out in a couple of years and he compete in 2029. But they're not going that. It's Stern's team. And, we talk about pressure or anything. He's going to have the most pressure on him than anyone. This is fully his team now. He blew up this core. Obviously, that's what happens when you miss the playoffs. But, this vision that he has, hopefully it works in New York and, with the big payroll that he can utilize because, this expectation is there's no more. It feels like there's no more waiting or understanding from the fan base with Diaz and Alonso walking now. So just like I said, not a lot going on in general in the sport. It just kind of feels stagnant and weird.
Well, Sal, I always bring this point up when I'm on the podcast with you too. You really want to be the Dodgers and you don't want to be the Orioles. And the Mets are in a point of position right now to where they could strike with their farm system. It is so deep. You can afford to trade a Brandon Sproat when you have guys like Jack Wenninger and Jonathan Santucci coming up in the system. You can afford to trade a Ronnie Mauricio, or dare I say, even a Mark Vientos off a down year, when you have guys like Jet Williams and Mitch Voit and AJ Ewing coming up. You've got all of these guys, not only at the AAA and AA level, but guys in the lower levels that honestly at this point look better than some of the guys at the higher levels. So with you having a team of Soto and Lindor, and I'll even throw a guy like Marcus Semien in there because, maybe he still has something left as a late 30s Gold Glove defensive second baseman. You want to try and win now, especially in a division where, let's be frankly honest, it's kind of taking a downturn. Go look at the Phillies and their outfield and their rotation right now. Zach Wheeler is heading towards 40. Ranger Suarez is going to be gone. Andrew Painter could be an ace, but he also gets hurt every year. So what's going to happen with the Phillies? We don't know. The Braves can't stay healthy. They haven't been healthy for 2 years now. The Marlins are on the up. The Nationals are about to enter another rebuild. And you've got this core with Lindor and Soto that maybe if you win 87 games next year, maybe it's enough to push for a division or win a wild card, dare I say. So you just don't want to get in danger of holding on to all of these prospects and not putting a package together for a guy like Freddie Peralta or even Tarek Skubal, who if the Mets don't trade for, they can always sign next season. And when you look at the Dodgers and what they've been able to do over the last 5 years with their farm system, they've been able to consistently rotate talent. Like when they got Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, like how they traded guys for Mookie Betts. They didn't hold on to their guys. In fact, the only people I think on their roster that are homegrown position player-wise is Andy Pajes and Will Smith. The rest of those guys were all brought in via trade or free agency. So that's the kind of team you want to be. And they're in a position right now to bring in more MLB talent.
Yeah, and when I think back on David Stern's tenure in Milwaukee, sure, he wasn't necessarily a huge guy in free agency. He did sign Yasmani Grandal. That was a pretty good signing for a one-year deal. But his biggest acquisition was Christian Yelich. And that was after a year where they narrowly missed out on the playoffs, if I recall correctly. And he traded a couple of big prospects to get Yelich, or guys who were highly touted at the time, most notably Lewis Brinson, who I know Brinson didn't quite break out in the majors, but they gave up at the time what looked like a pretty stiff price to get Yelich. And Yelich went on and almost won an MVP the next year and fully broke out in Milwaukee. So I think Stearns has the chips to make a Yelich type move. Maybe he goes back and trades for a guy like Peralta or trades for Skubal, because I think the team's biggest need right now, and I know they have a couple of needs, but their biggest need that they can get on the trade market is a pitcher. I think outside of Nolan McLean and Carson Benj, they have a lot of guys that I wouldn't necessarily consider untouchable. Like you were saying, Chris, there's a lot of depth here. I mean, it could be Jacob Reimer. It could be Ryan Clifford even. So you can trade from the major league roster. You could trade from, basically your entire farm system. So I think I expect David Stearns to make a splash at some point this year on the trade market. I don't know if it's going to happen before spring training, but I expect at some point this year, especially if they're contending, that he's going to use some of this prospect capital. There's no way that he's going to wait around and just, let it turn into, like you were saying, like an Orioles situation. I think he's going to make a move. I'm just not sure when it's going to happen or who it's going to be.
We didn't even mention Chris Suero, who dominated the AFL this year and was a top prospect. And now I don't even think he's a top 15 prospect in the Mets system anymore. But a first baseman, catcher, left fielder, he could be the centerpiece of a deal. So that just, if we had our good friend Michael Mayer on the show right now, I'm sure he could go 1 through 30 and spend a whole hour on every prospect. But that's how deep this system is. And it's just, they're in a position right now where you don't want to let people start to linger in the minors and lose their value. You want to strike right now.
Yeah, no, agreed. We'll see what they do. Hopefully Stearns does it sooner than later because I'm just very bored. It's a very boring off season. Put a deadline in. MLB. Make it exciting. Winter meetings was fun, and then it's been dull. But listen, like you said, the Mets they're in a rare spot now where they can deal a ton of prospect capital. And they, like you said, they should, and they're going to have to if they want to win right now. You got to give to get. So, we'll see what ends up happening, but there's still a lot that could be done here, and we'll wait as it does. So that'll wrap everything up this week. Thanks you guys for hopping on. And as always, everybody, let's go Mets.